My wife Val's ancestors were from Brighton, and her family's religion mostly is the Episcopalians, also called Anglicanism. She is extremely interested in visiting the biggest cathedral of the Episcopal Diocese, St. John the Divine Cathedral in New York. It is a famous tourist attraction in New York and is known as the largest Anglican cathedral in the world and one of the top 5 Christian churches in the world. Our couple visited this wonder of architecture with a couple of my friends during spring 2024. The Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, a marvel of Manhattan. The Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine, located in the Morningside Heights neighborhood of Manhattan, New York City, stands as a remarkable testament to architectural ambition and spiritual devotion. Situated at 1047 Amsterdam Avenue, this magnificent edifice is not only one of the largest cathedrals in the world, but also a significant landmark in the cultural and religious landscape of the city. Historical context and construction. The cathedral's history dates to its foundation stone being laid in 1892. Designed in the Gothic Revival style, St. John the Divine was envisioned by the architect George Louis Hines and his partner, Christopher Grant Lafarge. The construction of the cathedral has been a protracted endeavor, marked by various interruptions due to financial constraints, world events, and shifts in architectural vision. Although the cathedral was consecrated in 1911, it remains unfinished to this day, with ongoing work that reflects the evolving nature of its artistic and spiritual mission. Architectural wonders. The Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine is renowned for its breathtaking architectural features. The structure boasts a length of 601 feet, a height of 232 feet at its central dome, and an impressive facade adorned with intricate sculptures. One of its most striking elements is the Great Rose Window, which showcases stunning stained glass artistry that illuminates the interior with vibrant colors. Additionally, the cathedral houses a variety of chapels, each with unique artistic expressions, including the Chapel of St. Ansgar and the Chapel of St. Martin. Attractions for travelers. For travelers, the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine offers a multifaceted experience. Visitors are drawn not only to its architectural grandeur, but also to its rich tapestry of cultural events, including concerts, art exhibitions, and religious services. The cathedral's tranquil gardens provide a serene retreat from the hustle and bustle of the city, while its extensive collection of art and artifacts invites exploration and reflection. Moreover, the cathedral's commitment to social justice and community outreach resonates with many visitors, making it a place of both spiritual and social significance. Guided tours are available, allowing guests to delve deeper into its history, architecture, and ongoing projects, thus fostering a greater appreciation for this extraordinary institution. In conclusion, the Cathedral Church of St. John the Divine is an architectural marvel that encapsulates the spirit of New York City. Its location, history, and artistic wonders make it a compelling destination for travelers seeking to experience the intersection of faith, art, and community. As the cathedral continues to evolve, it remains a symbol of hope and resilience, inviting all to witness its grandeur and partake in its mission.
呢個係最大啦，好高啊！你睇 ，very tall。有，
The cathedral is an unfinished building, with only 2/3 of the proposed building completed, due to several major stylistic changes, work interruptions, and unstable ground on the site. The original design, in the Byzantine Revival and Romanesque Revival styles, began construction in 1892. After the opening of the crossing in 1909, the overall plan was changed to a Gothic Revival design. The completion of the nave was delayed until 1941 due to various funding shortfalls, and little progress has occurred since then, except for an addition to the tower at the nave's southwest corner. After a large fire damaged part of the cathedral in 2001, it was renovated and rededicated in 2008. The towers above the western elevation of the facade, as well as the southern transept and a proposed steeple above the crossing, have not been completed. Despite being incomplete, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine is the world's 4th largest church by area and either the largest or 2nd largest Anglican cathedral. The floor area of St. John's is 121,000 square feet, 11,200 square meters, spanning a length of 601 feet, 183 meters, while the roof height of the nave is 177 feet, 54 meters. Since the cathedral's interior is so large, it has been used for hundreds of events and art exhibitions. In addition, the Cathedral of St. John the Divine has been involved in various advocacy initiatives throughout its history. The cathedral close includes numerous buildings: the Leek and Watts Orphan Asylum building, the cathedral proper, the St. Faith's House, the choir school, the deanery, and the bishop's house. The buildings are designed in several different styles and were built over prolonged periods of construction, with the Leek and Watts Orphan Asylum predating the cathedral itself. The Cathedral Close was collectively designated an official city landmark by the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission in 2017. Cathedral history. The neighborhood of Morningside Heights was thinly settled in the 17th century by the Dutch, then by the British. It remained rural through the mid-19th century, with two exceptions. The first was the Bloomingdale Insane Asylum, no longer extant, which opened on the site of the Columbia University campus near 116th Street in 1821. The other was Leek and Watts Orphan Asylum, bounded by 110th Street to the south and 113th Street to the north, which later became the current cathedral site. 5. The Leek and Watts Asylum was incorporated in 1831 under Act of the New York State Legislature, and 3 years later, 25 acres, 10 hectares, land at the corner of Bloomingdale Road, now Broadway, and 110th Street was purchased from the Bloomingdale Asylum. The initial plans for the asylum were drawn up by Ithiel Town, but were revised several times to keep the costs within the asylum's budget. The cornerstone of the asylum was laid in 1838, and it was completed in 1843. Need for a cathedral. Meanwhile, the Episcopal Diocese of New York started to grow in the early 19th century. There were 26 Episcopal parishes in the city by 1800, and a decade later, that number had nearly doubled to 50. In 1828, the first proposal for a grand cathedral for the diocese was made by Bishop John Henry Hobart, who proposed a site near Washington Square Park. The church would be called the Cathedral of St. John the Divine, or St. John's Cathedral for short, after the revelation by John of Patmos, also called John the Divine. At 14, the plans were canceled because of objections over erecting such a large building for the diocese, a derivative of the Church of England, even as many New Yorkers still harbored resentment over the American Revolutionary War. In 1873, a cathedral board of trustees was established under Bishop Horatio Potter. The board decided on property just
呢個教啊，呢個教同嗰個天主教係差唔多嘅。佢講就係呢個教咧係唔承認嗰個教皇啊。你知唔知道教皇啊？教皇喺意大利嗰個賣鐵鋼嗰個教皇啊。佢張台叫做咩啊？我唔知道。呢個教啊係佢哋英國人嘅教，呢個教咧係基本上同天主教差唔多嘅，但是咧呢個教係唔認嗰個教皇啊，係認嗰個英國國王啊，所以係英國嘅國教嚟嘅，佢唔承認你教皇啊！你知道教皇喺嗰個梵蒂岡羅馬裏頭嘅梵蒂岡呢個教皇啊嘛。即係梵蒂岡嗰啲。佢唔承認嗰啲㗎。唔係，你啲教堂有啲行婚禮啊，死人都退翻去㗎。哦，係㗎咯。係啊。
South of Central Park, bounded by 59th Street to the north and 57th Street to the south. However, the purchase was canceled after the would-be donors lost their savings in the Panic of 1873. Yet another plot of land, at 8th Avenue and 74th Street, was offered to the church in 1882, but rejected due to the high cost of acquisition. By 1890, there were 40,000 Episcopalians in Manhattan, and Episcopalians made up the largest block of Protestants in the borough. Furthermore, many imposing institutions were being built in New York City, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Carnegie Hall, Metropolitan Opera House, and the American Museum of Natural History. Site selection. When Henry C. Potter, Horatio Potter's nephew, became the Diocese of New York's assistant bishop in 1883, he convened the trustees, to look for an alternate site. On June 1, 1887, Henry Potter publicly announced his intention to build St. John's, though the exact location was still to be determined. Potter described the planned cathedral as an American Westminster Abbey that would rival the Catholic St. Patrick's Cathedral in Midtown Manhattan. 1223, in his announcement, Potter called on New Yorkers to give funds toward the new cathedral, which was expected to cost $10 million. The plans for the cathedral were well received by both Protestants and non-Protestants, as well as the media and other denominational leaders. The donors included the wealthy Astor, Vanderbilt, and Belmont families. Additionally, the Barberini family's tapestries were gifted to the cathedral in 1891. Numerous sites in Manhattan were examined for the new cathedral's location, and by 1889, the Leake and Watts Asylum between 110th and 113th Streets had been chosen as the site for the future site of St. John's. News media such as the New York Times and Uptown Visitor praised the decision, as the site was located on a high point overlooking Central and Morningside parks. The committee had wanted to build slightly further north, on a more elevated plot between 116th Street to the south and 119th Street to the north. However, that plot would be too difficult to acquire, as ownership of that tract was divided among several entities. By contrast, the Leake and Watts Asylum had full control over their entire city block. 2930, the 11.5-acre, 4.7 hectares, asylum site was deeded to the cathedral in October 1891, and the asylum moved to Westchester County, New York. The asylum site was then acquired for $850,000. At the time, Morningside Heights was quickly being developed as a residential neighborhood surrounded by numerous higher education institutions. 5. The proposed cathedral's elevated location would have been visible from New Jersey, across the Hudson River to the west, as well as from the New York Bay to the south. 33. Architectural rendering of the cathedral's design for Hines and Lafarge, architects, 1891. Cathedral of St. John the Divine in 1910. Simultaneously, there was also debate over the new cathedral style. Because of the larger plot and more remote location from Midtown Manhattan, it was expected to be more elaborate than St. Patrick's. 18. The trustees had formed a committee on architecture in conjunction with William Robert Ware, a Columbia architecture professor, which held a design competition for St. John that involved several prominent architectural firms. Though everyone was free to enter the competition, 14 firms and architects were paid $500 each to create designs for the cathedral. The deadline for each plan was January 1889. That May, the Board of Trustees formed a committee to review the more than 60 designs that had been submitted. Many of the competitors were American, though only 4 were experienced in cathedral construction. The board members then discussed the designs privately. Some architects expressed concerns about the secret consultations, since the trustees generally did not have knowledge of architectural design. The competition was narrowed down to 4 finalists. Namely, these were Gerona by William A. Potter and R. H. Robertson, 3 arabesque scrolls within a circle by George L. Hines and Christopher Grant Lafarge with William Winthrop Kent.
Look at the gold leaf. The gold.
Yeah, beautiful. Very, very beautiful.
Very ostentatious.
You see?
DG by George M. Huss and J. H. Buck, and Jerusalem the Golden by William Halsey Wood. Gerona used the Gothic style based on Spanish cathedrals. AMDG and Jerusalem the Golden were in a regular Gothic style, and 3 arabesque scrolls was mainly Byzantine. Potter and Robertson were the only one of the 4 finalists who had significant experience at the time, and the trustees had agreed not to release any designs without the consent of all competitors, although some contestants broke the agreement anyway by revealing their designs to the media. 33. The finalists were given more than a year to refine the details of their plans. The original deadline was set for February 1890, but was later extended to November 43, after a failed proposal to host the World's Columbian Exposition in Morningside Park. 42. The submissions were placed in public view in April 1891. By then, the public was losing interest in the competition, and the finalist designs mainly received negative criticism. Plan selected. In July 1891, the Plan Selection Committee chose Hines and Lafarge's plan as the winning proposal. The design had been the trustees' second choice. Although the trustees liked Potter and Robertson's plan more, W.A. Potter was the bishop's half-brother, and the trustees did not want to be accused of nepotism. To Kent's consternation, he was initially not recognized as a co-collaborator and would not be acknowledged as such until the following year. The group's blueprints called for chapels and end sections with apses, a crossing containing 4 round arches, as well as a dome topped by a massive tower, and transepts with round edges. The interior was based upon Boston's Trinity Church, and the crossing was based upon Istanbul's Hagia Sophia, Venice's St. Mark's Basilica, and the Perigord Cathedral. The exotic design was seen as an example of the unusual architecture that was prevalent at that time. It was also Hines and Lafarge's first major commission. The firm later designed structures such as the Astor Court buildings at the Bronx Zoo, as well as the early stations of the Interborough Rapid Transit Company, the first operator of the present-day New York City subway. That October, the trustees directed the firm to revise their design further. The following month, it was announced that work would begin in early 1892, provided that Hines and Lafarge submitted their revised plans that April. The original plans were then substantially revised because the Board of Trustees wanted a Gothic-style appearance. The western towers were modified to remove the spires and enlarge the windows, and various Gothic details were placed on the facade. The nave was realigned from north-south to east-west so that the apse would face east, in the direction of the sunrise, to represent the resurrection of Jesus, as per Episcopal tradition. Hines and Lafarge objected to the realignment because it would result in the cathedral being hidden behind other buildings. In the final plan, 3 arabesque scrolls incorporated both Byzantine and Romanesque influences, with Gothic detailing on the exterior. Outwardly, the design resembled the AMDG plan from Huss and Buck. By April 1892, the trustees had raised much of the $850,000 required for land acquisition, though there still remained a deficit of $175,000. Construction and early years. Construction on the Cathedral of St. John the Divine was begun with the cornerstone laying ceremony on December 27, 1892, St. John's Day. 1,000 tickets for seats at the ceremony were distributed, though the actual attendance was 1,100. The cornerstone contained various objects such as a Bible and church papers. 61. Potter hit the stone 3 times with a mallet and said, "Other foundation can no man lay than that is laid, which is Jesus Christ." The following month, the remaining $175,000 for land acquisition had been secured, and the trustees moved to take title to the land, including the cathedral close around the cathedral's main building, in April. Unlike the main building, the cathedral close was not designed under a single master plan, and during the 1890s and 1900s, several proposals would be made for the site. Initial construction. Actual work on St. John's began in early 1893. The trustees initially expected that work would proceed quickly because much of the Morningside Heights plateau was made of shallow bedrock. However, in September 1893, builders unexpectedly hit pockets of soft shale and an underground spring at several locations about 40 feet, 12 meters below ground. One of these pockets was located directly below the site for one of the 4 piers that were to support the cathedral's massive 445-foot, 136 stone tower. The trustees briefly considered moving the entire cathedral slightly southward. They ultimately decided against moving the cathedral, believing it to be inauspicious if the cornerstone were to be moved. Instead, builders drilled several deep shafts until they hit the bedrock, then poured concrete pits within each shaft. The pits would then accommodate the construction of the tower's piers. The layer of bedrock was, in some cases, 72 feet, 22 meters beneath ground level. The pits were completed in late 1895 at a significantly higher cost than originally estimated. By 1898, St. John's had cost an estimated $750,000, and as per an 1896 estimate, the cathedral was projected to cost at least $5 million when complete. As a temporary measure, the Tiffany Chapel was purchased in mid-1898 so that services could be held there. The chapel was placed in the crypt, within the basement. The first services were held in January 1899 within the Tiffany Chapel. The crossing arches, located in the cathedral plot's eastern portion, were completed the following year, though 3 of the arches were temporarily sealed off until the transepts and nave could.
David's grandparents, when they went to church in England, they have a pocket for hymnals, for songbooks,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
and prayer books.
Yeah.
And they chose Trinity Church in Hartford because they had chairs like this.
You see this? I show you something. This window, you see this? It's so beautiful, you see. You see?
Yeah, I saw that.
Very beautiful. You see? The window, very. This window excellent. This one.
Be completed. By then, some $2 million had already been spent, even though little appeared to have been completed. Despite large donations from prominent figures such as financiers John Jacob Astor IV and William Waldorf Astor, Governor Levi P. Morton, banker J. P. Morgan, and businessman Cornelius Vanderbilt, the trustees continued to raise funds. In March 1903, the trustees announced that the next stage of St. John's construction would require $500,000 for building the choir and $200,000 for completing the loft, and that 8 massive granite columns would need to be procured to support the roof over the choir. Furthermore, the trustees would build 3 arches to support the rest of the roof. The choir columns, sourced from Vinalhaven, Maine, were each 54 feet 16 meters tall with a 6-foot, 1.8 m diameter. At the time, they were the world's second largest stone columns, but because of their size, 3 of the columns were cracked while being turned. The columns were then transported using a specially constructed barge towed by the large steam tug Clara Clarita. 88. When the columns arrived at Manhattan in July and August 1903, they were rolled onto flatbed trucks and brought to the cathedral's site. Since the builders did not have a derrick that was strong enough to lift the column pieces, they placed another order for wood to build a strong enough derrick. The columns were finally lifted in July 1904, more than a year after the initial announcement. The walls could not be placed until after the columns had been installed. Work also began in 1903 on the crossing ceiling, which was to contain Guastavino tiles, designed by Spanish architect Rafael Guastavino. The Board of Trustees implemented a new charter in early 1904, which provided for greater representation of laypeople on the board. By 1905, with $800,000 available for construction, the trustees anticipated that the cathedral would be completed within a decade. The church's great organ was ordered from Skinner the following year at a cost of $50,000, following a gift by the Morton family. It was almost completed by 1911 with nearly 7,000 pipes. The cost of the organ had risen to $70,000. Work also continued on the exterior walls of the choir and the 7 surrounding chapels in the apse, which required 100,000 short tons, 91,000 t of granite. Builders estimated that 300,000 short tons, 270,000 t, of stone would have been used for the walls once work was completed. Gutzon Borglum was commissioned for some of the initial sculptural elements on St. John's, though his relation with the trustees was strained. He destroyed 2 angels after criticism of his work and threatened to quit in 1906. Because of the delays in construction, members of the public began to question the necessity of constructing such a large cathedral. With little progress to show for, public sentiment began to turn against the cathedral. Even the trustees started to have doubts about certain aspects of the plan, criticizing Hines and Lafarge's small staff, their simultaneous involvement in many other projects, slow construction, and cost overruns. Crossing opening and change in design. Although Hines died in 1907, Lafarge continued to design the crossing, choir, and apse of St. John's. By then, the architectural preferences of the public were shifting away from the original design. Additionally, communication between Lafarge and the trustees were deteriorating, with several trustees calling for Lafarge's removal. The choir was covered in 1908, and the crossing was installed the next year. The choir was nearly complete by October 1909, but there were insufficient funds to complete its construction, delaying its opening by at least 6 months. At that time, St. John's was earning about $24,000 per year and had a $500,000 endowment, while at least $1 million was needed to complete construction. In March 1911, trustees finally confirmed an opening date of April 19, 1911. The first service in the choir and crossing, the consecration of the choir, occurred as scheduled on that day. The completed portions of the cathedral were widely praised, though few newspapers devoted extensive coverage to the event, except the New York Herald. 107. A month after the choir's consecration, the trustees suddenly fired Lafarge, commissioning Ralph Adams Cram to take Lafarge's place as lead architect of St. John's. The trustees had exercised a clause in their contract with Hines and Lafarge, enabling them to hire another architect if either partner were to die. Lafarge was not made aware of the matter beforehand, and was only notified via a cable sent by his partner Benjamin Wister Morris. The original Byzantine Romanesque design was changed to a Gothic design, and Cram was asked to convert many existing features to Gothic style. The move was criticized in the local media, who claimed that the trustees and Cram had been conspiring to eject Lafarge from the lead architect position. However, the New York Sun reported that Cram had only reluctantly accepted the commission because the trustees had threatened to hire a foreign architect otherwise. Cram presented a master plan for the Cathedral Closes buildings in October 1911, and his revised designs for the main structure were completed in 1913. Regardless, there was still not enough money to complete the cathedral's construction, as the New York Episcopal Diocese Cathedral League had mentioned in 1912 that $5.5 million was still needed. The diocese was able to construct several structures to the south of the main building, see Cathedral Close, as part of a plan that had been approved by the trustees in late 1911. These structures included the St. Faith's House, 1909, Synod House, 1911 to 1913, Cathedral School, 1912 to 1913, and Cathedral House, 1912 to 1914. Nave and North Transept. By January 1916, Bishop David H. Greer announced that the diocese would construct St. John's nave and narthex, along with a pair of towers on the western elevation of the facade above the narthex. The project would cost $1.5 million, even though St. John's only had about $200,000 on hand as of June 1915. A groundbreaking ceremony for the nave was held on May 8, 1916. That November, construction stopped due to material and funding shortages during World War I, and the trustees had decided against raising funds until after the war. Cram edited his plans in the interim. In February 1919, the trustees approved Cram's revised plan to incorporate a memorial for soldiers. He knew plans required $5 to $6 million, but would make St. John's the third or fourth largest worldwide. The cathedral did not yet have the money to build the nave, and furthermore, in 1920 the trustees decided not to hold fundraising drives for said purpose. Because of an unstable economy, work did not resume for another 4 years, though both Greer and Bishop Charles Sumner Birch supported the project. In 1923, Birch's successor William T. Manning announced a $15 million capital campaign to raise money for this project. The New York Campaign Committee, headed by then-Governor Franklin D. Roosevelt, campaigned from 1923 to 1925 to raise $6 million, equivalent to $107 million in 2023. By May 1924, Manning announced that $2.5 million had been donated within the previous 3 months, and that work on the nave would soon begin if that rate of donation were to continue. St. John's was seeking price estimates for the nave's construction by that November, and the baptistry was donated the same year. Some $7.7 million had been raised by February 1925, and the laying of the nave's cornerstone occurred on November 9, 1925. Manning wanted the cathedral to be an interdenominational place of worship, but was still reluctant to add other denominations' members to the Board of Trustees. Notably, Manning rejected a request from John D. Rockefeller Jr., a Baptist, despite the latter's $500,000 donation toward the cathedral's building fund. In January 1927, Manning announced that the trustees had approved Cram's proposal for a square tower above the crossing. The tower would replace the dome, which did not conform to the Gothic style. With sides of 60 feet 18 meters, the tower would be half as wide as the arches below it. Cram's blueprint revisions, published in 1929, entailed building the 300-foot-tall, 91 square tower over the crossing and adding 2 portals to the western elevation. Additionally, St. John's northern transept began construction in December 1927. Since the funds for that transept were donated solely by women, it was called the Women's Transept. Work on the Women's Transept was halted in October 1930 due to a lack of funds. Construction at St. John's was otherwise unaffected by the Great Depression. During this duration, work was concentrated mainly on the western elevation. When construction of the Women's Transept resumed in 1934, the nave and the western elevation were nearly complete except for the 2 towers above the western facade, but work on the crossing tower and south transept had yet to commence. By 1938, the nave was completed, but the temporary construction wall between the nave and crossing was still in place because the Byzantine Romanesque crossing's design had yet to be harmonized with the Gothic nave. As such, Cram subsequently replaced the portions of the ceiling above the choir and the apse's eastern section. Additionally, the nave started to be used for services, even though it had not yet been dedicated. The 1939 WPA Guide to New York City stated that $20 million had been spent on the cathedral by then.